Hello, hello? Yes. So I would say we can keep one here. People on there's not gonna talk are not gonna talk anyway, right? It's only gonna be the person here. Yes. Yes, it's fine. It's fine. So I would say Scott, sit down there. In order, so.
So I'll speak from here.
Are you speaking after?
Hi, how are you?
Scott should sit in the middle. Scott, and then you sit there. And Brad sit here. Brad can. Yes. Okay, just sit. Both of you just sit wherever you want. Yes, perfect.
You want to stay here?
Could I? You mind?
Yeah, of course.
I don't mind. I'll be on the.
Okay.
I'm going to be just beside you. Should we sit already?
What?
Should we sit already or?
No, we can stand. Can you take a picture?
Yeah, just taking some pictures, I guess. Ni, are you taking pictures? Are you taking? Tá tirando foto? Tira algumas fotos nossas, por favor.
Hello, everyone. If you want to take a seat, we can start. Okay.
Thank you for making everything.
Good evening. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here with you tonight. So many of you to really start a new journey together, a journey that can bring many of us from around the world to think in a way that will transform society for future generations in a inclusive and with a vision towards the future and not just the immediate present. And for this reason, I'm going to first, we're going to have a little bit of remarks from the core of the team that in a way made this possible. And the first person we need to thank for this is our president, Brad Carson, who's here with us. Brad Carson is the 21st president of the University of Tulsa, and he has a distinguished career in public service, law, and education. He was professor at the University of Virginia, teaching courses related to national security and public sector innovation. He has a very outstanding career. I would like to point out the fact that he was actually representing the congressional district that is home to the Cherokee Nation. And for this reason, he was also the chief executive officer of Cherokee Nation Business. So really someone who knows the place, knows the region, but also in a way had the vision to allow for this to happen, and hopefully we will be able to work together to strengthen the center into something that will give back to everyone the possibility of participating in powerful, courageous knowledge, again, for a better future. Thank you, Brad. Please come here for a couple of remarks.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you for reading the abbreviated version of my biography. You saved us all of that pain. I bring greetings also from Blaine Gretheman, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Tulsa, who would love to be here tonight, but there's another conference celebrating the 750th a memorial, if you will, of the execution of Boethius, the Roman philosopher and diplomat, that's also happening on the campus of the University of Tulsa. Clara, I know, will indulge me for a couple of minutes because I took, well, an exceptional thing for me, really, which is I prepared some written remarks that I'd like to refer to. And I do that because of the importance of this event. And for those who have followed the Center for Heterodox Economics, you'll know that I can modestly say I had some involvement in its establishment. And indeed, while Scott Carter has been a long-time excellent faculty member at the University of Tulsa in helping hire Clara and Bruno, who are now critical members of this effort, as well as the broader parts of the University of Tulsa. But I thought I might start by saying, as a way of introduction, and maybe by stirring some of the controversy, I hope, that will be explored over the next couple of days, by talking about the origins of this center and why I think it can play a critical role, too, in thinking about the future of economics and politics in this country and perhaps beyond. The quest for economic understanding often begins with a moment of revelation. And for me, personally, that came at Oxford, where I studied a very long time ago, taking a degree in that much maligned subject, politics, philosophy, and economics. Yes, PPE. Now, whatever one thinks of that degree, and in the UK at least, many people are critical of it these days, I will say that it had several valuable components, one of which involved, as an economics student, encountering Joan Robinson's penetrating critiques of orthodox theory. I remember at that time, just as a very young man, everyone saying the same thing about her. She was the most accomplished economist to never win the Nobel Prize. To me, her work, alongside titans like Nicholas Kaldor, Michael Kalecki, and Piero Sraffa, the Cambridge School, they revealed economics not as a monolithic structure, but as a dynamic conversation that spanned generations. In the late 1980s, their work was still resonant. These thinkers described to me and other young students there how markets, institutions, and human behavior interweave in ways that defy simple mathematical abstraction. Their insights fundamentally challenge the mechanical view of economics, demonstrating how power relations, uncertainty, and historical contingency shape economic outcomes. Through their work, I began to see economics as a living, breathing discipline rather than a set of immutable laws. Their work was powerful, penetrating, and often, if not always, persuasive. Today, as we inaugurate this conference, we carry forward a tradition exemplified by the Cambridge School. The beauty of heterodox economics lies, for me at least, in its multiplicity of perspectives. Some scholars focus on institutional evolution and path dependence, while others explore the dynamics of financial instability or the role of class conflict in distribution. From feminist economics, highlighting unpaid labor, to ecological approaches that integrate natural systems, each lens reveals different aspects of economic reality. This diversity isn't a weakness, but a strength, a recognition that complex social phenomena require multiple analytical frameworks. The richness of heterodox thought provides tools to understand phenomena that orthodox economics often treats as externalities or anomalies. The care economy, environmental degradation, technological lock-in, and the persistence of inequality. Each tradition brings its own methodological innovations, from network analysis to historical case studies. By questioning fundamental assumptions about rationality, equilibrium, and market efficiency, heterodox approaches generate novel insights about recurring crises, technological change, and economic development. Perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that economics is not just about market efficiency but about human well-being, social justice, and sustainable prosperity. Yet as we celebrate heterodoxy, we must not neglect to turn a critical eye upon ourselves. We often rightfully criticize the tribalism of mainstream economics, its unthinking acceptance of certain axioms and frameworks. We must ask ourselves difficult questions too. Have we created our own orthodoxy, even while dressing it up in heterodox clothing? Are we truly debating ideas or merely reaffirming our own unreflective commitments? What will I, as a modest student of heterodox economics, hear at this conference that would surprise me? One panel here illustrates that particular concern. To me, the panel called Political Economy of Occupied Palestine. While Middle East policy is certainly a legitimate subject for academic discourse, the panel seems to have, my reading, mostly people who agree on one of the most controversial subjects of world politics. The absence of diverse perspectives, particularly regarding Israel's right to exist and the events of October 7th, suggests we may have created our own echo chamber. The very purpose of heterodox thinking is to challenge established narratives. Here we seem to present only one narrative, unchallenged, largely predictable. It is a mistake, I believe, a blunder. I am personally disappointed by that. It is worth returning to the example of Joan Robinson that I started with. I only told half the story of what everyone knows about her. Something that is well known in economics, it is the part about why she is thought not to have won the Nobel Prize. Robinson's accomplishments, which even her critics will tell you are quite brilliant, were irremediably tarnished by her uncritical admiration for Mao's Cultural Revolution, a decade-long reign of error, if not terror, where historians tell us at least 500,000 people were killed, and some estimate as much as 20 million died through execution, suicide, famine, and more. Robinson was unapologetic in her support, which I believe her biographers say scarcely wavered, even as the Chinese Communist Party itself later denounced Mao's excesses. It is a sad story to me how Robinson's important critiques of society and advocacy for working-class Britons were undermined by her own inability to apply the same critical lens to authoritarianism. She must have thought that whole cliche about enemy of enemy being a friend. But such moral obtuseness had its costs, real costs. A coal miner in Yorkshire, someone Robinson might have thought a natural constituent for her thought, might well have asked, how can we trust her critique of British society when she blindly praised the devastating impacts of the Cultural Revolution? Her stance, I do think it is accurate to say, compromised her broader message and has tarnished her intellectual legacy. Of course, as Robert Conquest observed, political movements often act as if led by secret agents of their worst enemies who undermine their own credibility through intellectual blind spots and dogmatic thinking. But it is a cautionary lesson for everyone involved in politics. Dissidence as an identity is a romantic folly to me. As someone, as Clara said, who campaigned in some of the poorest communities in this nation, trying to convince them about progressive ideals. This kind of folly works against success, and it should be eschewed. So let us therefore not only celebrate heterodoxy, but practice it authentically. True heterodox thinking requires the courage to challenge not just others' orthodoxies, but our own. It demands we embrace genuine debate, diverse perspectives, and the possibility that truth might emerge from unexpected quarters. The strength of heterodox economics lies not in its opposition to mainstream thinking, but in its capacity to generate new insights through the collision of different viewpoints. We must ensure that our commitment to heterodoxy extends beyond mere rhetoric to shape how we conduct our academic discourse. Some of you in this room are admirers of Antonio Gramsci. I believe Clara herself has said as much to me. I have at least one thing in common with Gramsci. Every picture of him that you will ever see shows him in the three-piece suit. Yes, Gramsci always wore a formal suit, at least in pictures that we have. Whatever the merits of our fashion choices, I've always found this sartorial choice to be revelatory of his genius. He wanted, or so I've always imagined, to show that he was more mainstream than the mainstream, knowing that only in this way would he find his project successful. So as you begin your work here at the center, I hope you embrace Gramsci's strategic wisdom. I hope that your goal is not merely to critique from the margins that I know too well many critics find actually quite hospitable, but to transform economic thinking from within. Like him, I believe you must be more rigorous than the orthodox, more empirical than the empiricists, more theoretical than the theorists, and more resistant to faddishness than the stodgiest of conservatives. Only then, and only then, can heterodox fulfill its true purpose, not as a refuge for dissenters, but as a forge for better ideas about how the world can actually work better. I know many here today welcome controversy, so please consider this my own challenge, perhaps a controversial one to you. I wish you a successful few days here in the lovely city of Tulsa, and I wish this conference and the center much success. Clara?
Thank you, Brad. Thank you very much. Before we move on to Scott's remarks, I just wanted to acknowledge Jisoo Park, our assistant director of the center that really did all the work to get us here. So thank you, Jisoo. Would you like to say a word?
Okay. I would like to say thank you for everyone who's been supporting us, including mental support, emotional support. Our wonderful student team, Cyrus, Jacob, Daniel, Elliot, I really appreciate your help. Linda Wanling, our wonderful economics faculty, Jason, I see, Karthik, Christina, Stephen, thank you for your help.
Thank you. And Marjan, who helped us a lot with the flyers, crucial. Yes, and Stephanie, of course. Okay, a word for Scott. Scott, do you want to come here? I think it's better.
I can speak from here, if it's all right. Can you see me here? Okay, everybody can hear me here, okay?
But maybe they see you better here.
Okay, I can see me better. Sure, let me do that. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank the president for his remarks. I think it's important. I think his remarks illustrate what an outsider actually perceives the heterodoxy to be, and how important it is for us to understand what the heterodoxy actually is and how we can actually develop it. I will say, it was called about the political economy of occupied Palestine. I will say that the first principles of this conference is going to recognize the genocide of our age, to have the intellectual courage, to have the intellectual honesty and courage to recognize that, because if we do not recognize that, then what we do is just folly. And we are going to do something more than that. So I want to say that, okay? On behalf of the Department of Economics, I would like to welcome you to the inaugural conference for the Center for Heterodox Economics, or RCHE. We convened to kick this ambitious endeavor off as the biggest of bangs possible. We gathered together on this occasion in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the reddest of states in this increasingly red country. The forces of fascist reaction have gained a significant upper hand in this land of purported free, the land of the purported free, and the home of the ostensible brave. Yet, literally in the belly of this beast, here we make our stand. The hill upon which we do not wish to die, but rather from which we are prepared to attack, metaphorically speaking. Heterodox economics, as juxtaposed against orthodox or mainstream economics, is much more than a branch or field of economic science. Those of us who have chosen to walk this difficult road within our discipline know that at the heart of the matter is a fundamental difference in the way in which we conceive of what economics is. And I'm going to cut it short. I have other stuff. I'll make it available for you. But I also want to address here, I was going to talk about the different panels, et cetera, but I'm addressing here because we have people here. We have the community here. We think it's important to have the community here. The fact that we have throngs of people involved in this endeavor is purposeful. We must, as a species, reclaim the humanity that is being violently stripped from us by capitalism and the forces of reactionary, increasingly fascistic oppression, division, divide and conquer, hate. That means, for many of us argue, that we reject the violent assumptions imposed by the mainstream paradigm. By presenting what we have to offer before a wider audience of people in our communities who are increasingly adversely affected by the poor and indeed violent economic policies of mainstream theories, we intend to expose that the economics emperor indeed has no clothes, that the models and approaches foisted upon us and upon an unsuspecting public as facts of life and science are anything but. It is not natural for Elon Musk and the billionaire and millionaire, multimillionaire class writ large to have everything. The fact, in fact, that they seem that they do is a fact of not a fact of law, it's a fact of what we choose to allow to have happen. So it's on this occasion that we launched the Center for Heterodox Economics. This is what our purpose is, to make sure that you, the public, hold economic science accountable, because I promise you, if they're left to its own devices, it ain't gonna happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. And Scott, of course, is also the chair of the economics department. Bruno, that we have here, Bruno Miller Teodosio, is part of our Department of Economics and crucial member of the CHE. He wants to say a couple words, and then we open it up to the panel.
Okay, so hello everyone. I will try to make this as short as possible because we're here to hear, to see our panelists talking about heterodox economics. I just want to say a couple words that I think are important right now. And when we were dreaming about the center, we have been discussing over and over again, and we decided that we have some pillars, some ideas that unify our work. So we have the recognition of how important it is to acknowledge political economy, history of economic thought, economic history, and praxis, which is the application of our theory to change the world. So this is what this is guiding us as a center, and this is guiding everything that we do, including this event here. Moreover, I want to talk a little bit what is heterodox economics, because heterodox economics is a body of different theories, but this is also a community. And this community is exactly what we are doing here. We are together celebrating this creation of the center, but we have people from all over the world in a single space fighting for the same thing. One important thing in our ideas is pluralism. We are always open to different theories, different methods, different approaches. Everything that's open to us to help us as a tool to understand the world, we are open for to understand these things. One thing that unites us as this community is the understanding that we need to put people over profits. That's the most important thing that makes scholars, the community, the organizers, to be here together in this night. We are also designing and launching this minor in heterodox economics because we think that it is necessary to educate the younger generations, to show them that we have some alternatives, right? So this is what we're doing. You guys brought us here, and we are trying to go further and beyond. That's our task as the chair. And I think that to finish what I want to say here is, I understand that what we are doing here tonight is a celebration, but we're also fighting for a better future for us all. Thank you so much.
Alrighty, you got a sense of the controversy already in our very initial remarks, so you won't get bored at the conference. I just wanted to point out, before I turn the word to our panelist, the urgency of the moment. We have 18 million households in the United States who are food insecure. So this is more than 1 out of 10. We have almost 1 out of 6 children in absolute poverty in the United States. And in the world, there is 1 out of 6 in extreme poverty, meaning that they live with less than $2 a day. In the meantime, billionaire wealth has never increased like the past year. It actually tripled between 2023 and 2024. This meant that it was accumulated to a pace of $5.7 billion a day. This is the type of world we live in, and this is the type of world we need to construct theory for. A world that desperately needs economists to intervene in a real way, to avoid just being in the privilege of academia. I've seen many radical economists who prefer to just sit and write and think. I do think that this center is also about action, and this is very important. We will bring up a generation of scholars who are eager to challenge the conventional paradigms, but this will only happen if the scholars can actually engage with real-life social struggles. So for us, it is very important to expose students, to expose people to what actually happens in Tulsa, like everywhere else in the world, and so that knowledge can actually serve social transformation and learn from what is happening in the real. I think the pluralism of heterodoxy, though, has one point of unity, which is the real, as I think Anwar will talk about, even maybe if he doesn't think all heterodox are for the real. This is... I know his work too well. So anyway, so this is really, I think, very important. We hope to be a point of reference for the community of Tulsa and beyond. So we will have monthly meetings that will be talking about topics that matter for people, starting from exploitation and worker self-management, all the way to the right to housing and much more. And this, again, is integral to the building of knowledge that is innovative and useful to change this world that has never been in such crisis. Without further ado, let me present our speakers. We have a shift. Thank you, all three. And now we're going to bring up Anwar Sheikh, Jamie Galbraith, and Ingrid Kavengraven. Van Graven, sorry. My, please, come on over. So what we'll do is I'll present the speakers, and then we will have a panel-like session. So we'll have 10 minutes each, more or less, and then a second round, and then we'll open it up to questions. The title of the panel is, How Does Your Work Embody Heterodoxy? So I was actually very much interested in the speakers giving also a personal perspective of what it has meant for them to build a career as a heterodox economist, the challenges, and I think, as President Carson said, how to avoid just being at the margins, can we make our work matter? And I think this is indeed a challenge he launched that is very important for us. So we have Anwar Sheikh, who is a professor emeritus of economics at the New School for Social Research. He's an associate editor of the Cambridge Journal of Economics and was senior scholar and member of the macro modeling team at the Levi Economics Institute of Bard College from 2000 to 2005. In 2014, he was awarded the Nord-Sud International Prize for Literature and Science from Italy's Fondazione Pescara-Abruzzo. His intellectual philosophy appears in the most recent edition of the book Eminent Economist, published by Cambridge University Press, along with similar essays from 30 prominent economists, including 7 current Nobel Prize laureates. I don't know why this biography doesn't mention Anwar's most important book, which is Capitalism, Competition, Conflict, Crisis, with Oxford University Press. And now Anwar is actually working on a abbreviated version of what is for many a very fundamental text to learn about economics more broadly. And then we have Ingrid with us. Ingrid Van Graven is a political economist and heterodevelopment economist. She's a senior lecturer at King's College London and holds a PhD in economics from the New School. Her work is focused on uneven development, international financial subordination, and the decolonization of economics. And then we have with us Jamie Galbraith, who made it last minute with the last minute flight. We are so grateful. Jamie holds the Lloyd Benston Jr. Chair in Government Business Relations at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs and the professorship in government at the University of Texas, Austin. He was executive director of the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress in the early 80s, and before that, an economist for the House Banking Committee. He chaired the Board of Economists for Peace and Security from 1996 to 2006 and directs the University of Texas Inequality Project. He's managing editor of Structural Change in Economic Dynamics. It's really amazing to have you here. So I don't see a particular order. Maybe we can have Anwar go first, and then Ingrid, and then Jamie. Does that work? Yes? Okay, perfect.
Should I stand up there?
Yes,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Oh, I will need my computer up here. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. Pleasure in not only the sense of the lovely people, the many people I know, but in the sense of feeling the rise of a kind of critical view. We don't have to agree. In fact, I never agree with anybody, but we have to like each other because we are in a common struggle. And we don't necessarily have the same answer. Let me give you an illustration. I was part of the anti-Vietnam movement in the 60s, and I was part of the occupation at Columbia University at 68, which meant that I lost my scholarship and had to work for a living. We formed something called the Union for Radical Political Economics, and that is still there now. It is, they raise money, we have a journal, we meet once or twice a year, maybe more, and we present papers in a forum like this. And you know, there are such differences among the people. We try not to make them personal. One of my best friends, maybe I shouldn't mention his name, but anyway, Mike Zweig, was a very right-wing economist when he first joined because we were open to everything. Then he became a revolutionary communist. Then he moved to some other communist party. Then he created his own center to help support workers, and that's in New York. We never disliked each other. We had differences, and these differences could be sharp, but it didn't translate into some kind of hatred. In fact, it was love. We really liked each other, and we still like each other. So I think the fact that people go through these phases does not mean that we cut off from them, because it's through this interaction that people come to different points of view, including ourselves, by the way. So I think we need to mention that. I don't think anybody should be tarred by that. And I come from a place in Pakistan where the country, my side of the country, committed enormous brutal actions on another side, East Pakistan, and we had to take sides. And I had no doubt about where my sympathy lay and whose side, the other side. So, and I want to tell a story about Joan Robinson. This uses up all my time, but anyway, Joan Robinson treated me with great affection. I'd never met this giant of an economist, and she walked in and started talking to me, and it's through her encouragement that I did a paper which became quite well known, called the Humbug Production Function. It also exiled me from the profession, but that's another story. She remained kind and critical and supportive. And I have really, in some ways, she's my mentor. And our disagreements are our disagreements. I mean, you know, that's not the essential issue. Kindness is a very important issue. Openness of other people's differences. It doesn't mean you can't fight, but you have to be not translated into something more than that. And it's not easy to do, by the way. You know, we have to keep working at it. So when I went to graduate school, which was 1967, I started studying microeconomics, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, the representation of society was so bizarre. It was kind of mental illness. Microeconomics, of people maximizing their own utility, whatever the hell that meant, and not caring about other people. I mean, I started as an engineer, so I know a little math. When you put something like a utility function with x1, x2, x3, you know mathematically they can't interact with each other, so they can't be people. That's obvious. And when you drive all these results about people with elements that can't be people, you should be aware that there's a contradiction. And then you have to ask why. It's not that the formers didn't know that. It's because they were trying to create a vision of perfect capitalism. And that vision only works if everybody does what's their self-interest and nobody else is affected by it. So you have to make it some kind of independence of other people. And that's standard in microtext. The first place you bring it up where they interact with each other is called an imperfection. I mean, think about that. The first representation of social interaction among humans is an imperfection. So I moved away from that. I studied anthropology. I didn't move away from economics, by the way, but I studied anthropology and sociology. The New School has a particular tradition, which that everybody teaching on the New School has to be on dissertations in other departments. So you really have to understand if you're going to participate. Sorry. Okay, I've gone too long on what the British call chuntering, so let me, I just lost this, it went, hang on. Let me move on to what I want to say, which apparently it doesn't want me to say. I don't know what happened. Hang on 1 second. Yeah, there it is, okay, it came back up. So the question that came to me, I don't know what happened here, sorry. Okay. The questions that I began to encounter came from teachers of mine. Gary Becker won the Nobel Prize in Economics. I totally disagree with him. We actually went and kind of politically attacked him in his classes. We also, Bill Vickery was a Quaker, a lovely man, and nobody could understand why he was doing this. And we said that to him, and they tolerated us in some way. And certainly they didn't punish us for our views, as some faculty did, by the way. So then I became interested in how we could present an alternate view of microeconomics, in a view in which interaction is part of the deal, and yet we can get the empirical part, which is demand curves and elasticities and Engels' law and all of that. You can't throw that away because that's empirically true. But how do you derive that? And I found in Gary Becker's work an attempt to do that, and he got attacked so much for it that he abandoned it. And that attempt was to show that you can take a group of, any group of people who disagree with each other, who are, it doesn't matter, but as they act as a group, they produce a particular aggregate outcome. You know, in stochastic things, that's a kind of a mean. And if you change a price or change income, there'll be kind of a drift in the crowd, not because of any great neoclassical structure, but because the change space by having income rise or price rise moves the average in that direction. You can see that when commodities change prices or your income changes, it's very easy to show from that you can derive all the empirical results of microeconomics without making any assumption about selfishness, utility, independence, and so on. And that's useful because that's a kind of stochastic economics. It doesn't require everybody to be alike. It requires only that the group has a character which changes according to the limits of income and all that, but not, it's a kind of drift. And that's well documented. You can do that with all kinds of other, I really have to get back to, oh, here it is. So that's, I developed in the book that I wrote in 2016, which is called Capitalism, a very detailed representation of the different, derivation of the different aspects of microeconomics. Downward sloping demand curves, elasticities, competition among firms, all of the stuff that you get in the first section of an economics text, let's say Samuelson from my generation. Doesn't like me. Okay, there it is. I wrote this all out, so. Okay. So the point is that I can derive, and we can derive, the observed phenomenon. That's very important. If you disagree, that's fine, but you, as any kind of explanation has to do, you have to explain what they explain. You can't disagree from the facts. You have to disagree to the approach to the facts. So when I say something, we should be more like physicists, I don't mean in their theory alone, but I don't know what the hell's going on. But in understanding that you have to have a general structure. You have a coherent set of assumptions, and they must be consistent with the empirical evidence, and you must be able to explain. And that's not easy, by the way. I mean, it takes a long period of time. I don't know. I guess his computer doesn't really like what I'm saying. Shouldn't have been listening to the president, that's why. So the other side, I've gone on too long. The other thing that was of interest in economics is macroeconomics. What do we say? Oh, sorry. We can say that there is inflation, there's unemployment, there's international trade, there is regular crises, there are long waves, there are depressions. The task is to show that you have a framework from which these can arise naturally, but it has certain conditions, and you have to test those conditions. You have to look at the empirical work. So every one of those 16 chapters that I did, I read the alternate literature, I read the orthodox literature, I read the empirical literature, and I tried to show how to explain all that. It took me 20 years. I can't say it was fun, but sometimes it was fun. And I'm so happy that I had the energy and space to do that, because the New School is an interdisciplinary program like this will be, and people from different points of view and different domains in social science will be able to argue with each other. And I hope that's a key thing. So let me leave it there, except to say that the task of approaching the real should be taken as a series of steps. I mean, some people can jump to that, but on the other hand, you can't get from that the implications. You really have to take time, and that means dealing with other people who've done the same thing. It's not going to be invented from your mind. It's going to be your understanding and difference, but application to the same issue. Difference doesn't mean you forget about their point of view. It means that you have to apply your argument to the same phenomena if you're going to really test. And so being heterodox does not mean, in my view, being individual, in the sense you go do your own thing. You have to confront the rest. And that's a long task, and it's a collective task. People can correct you and help you, but that is a necessary aspect of creating a different economics. Heterodox economics involves variety, but must involve also some consistency. And that is something that comes from argument. So I encourage you to argue. Don't have to shoot people, but you can argue sometimes quite visibly, and trust that out of it something can come. And this doesn't happen individually, by the way. It has to be collective, because you may disagree and fight and so on. This is exactly the space that you need to do that. It's a signal moment in the recovery of various attempts to deal with social science and to confront orthodox economics. They won't confront us, but that's a separate issue. We have to confront them. So I'm very encouraged by the energy and size of this, and I hope that I will be back here to encourage you and more likely confound you. And that has given me more hope than anything that's happened since the 60s. Since the time we began to think that we could change the world, and we were wrong, but we did change some parts of the world. And hopefully you inherit that which what we try to pass down. Thank you. So should I step down the next person? Yes.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yeah? Okay, cool. Thank you so much for the invitation, and congratulations on the center. It's really exciting. It's very rare to see heterodoxy expanding, so it's really nice and exciting to see where this is going. So I'm going to talk about three things. What I think heterodox economics is, just very, very briefly, so we're on the same page. My journey into heterodoxy and also within heterodoxy. And also what I think heterodox economics should be, or what I would like heterodox economics to be. So what is heterodox economics? This is a big, controversial question, and I'm sure we have different definitions of it, all of us. I wrote a short paper on this with Carolina Alves as well, who's here in the audience, Heterodox Economics as a Positive Project. And just very briefly, how I see it is studying the economy in a way that includes considering how power relations determine economic outcomes. So here we're talking about power relations within social relations of production and reproduction, right? Not in the market. That's how the mainstream understands power. And then heterodox economics then encompasses all the traditions that try to explain this, try to explain the system and its tendencies referring to these power relations. So you have Marxist traditions, which is where I find myself, post-Keynesian traditions, feminist, institutionalist, and many others that I won't try to mention all because then I'll leave someone out. So it's a big umbrella. It consists of a lot of different theories, but it doesn't apply, that doesn't imply that heterodox economics is anything that's not mainstream, right? So it is important, I think, to try to define, what are the positive strengths of heterodox economics, so that we can push those strengths forward. So my journey into and within heterodox economics. So I was usually attracted to the heterodox economics of the New School. That's where I went to do my PhD. After I studied development studies alongside mainstream economics for my undergrad and master's. And I was very dissatisfied with how economics was dealt with in development studies and in the mainstream, but I didn't know about heterodox economics. So I think this is a case for a lot of people that are studying undergrad, masters. It's hard actually to come across it. So of course, in my situation, I thought I needed to draw on sociology or geography to understand these economic questions and how they were relevant for the global South. So I come from my sort of personal background is I was interested in debt justice. I was a debt activist, and I was trying to understand, why structural adjustment programs didn't work, why financial inclusion wasn't working in the global South. And taking development economics modules just did not give the answers. So I randomly heard about the New School and Heterodox Economics in a lecture that I went to at LSE where Robert Wade was teaching global political economy. And he just mentioned it very, like in passing. He was doing a job interview at the New School, actually, in the economics department at that time. And he just mentioned it because he was missing the lecture the following week. And that's how I found out about it, and that's basically, why I'm here. A random mention, which led to a lot of Googling, reading, and then, PhD applications. So centers like this, I think, raising awareness about heterodoxy can help people who want to ask, critical questions but actually don't know that heterodox economics exist, come into heterodoxy in a less random way. So that's great. And as probably everyone here, I do feel like I embody a kind of heterodoxy within the heterodoxy. And at the New School and in other heterodox spaces that I found myself in the beginning of the journey, I did find that there wasn't as much theorization from the South. Maybe that's changed now. But at that time, I did feel a bit isolated and trying to theorize from the South. One of my papers that came out of my PhD was on dependency theory. And the way I ended up defining dependency theory, I think, reflects some of my view of heterodoxy and how I embody heterodoxy, which is the question that we're asked to talk about. So in that paper, Beyond the Stereotype, I argue that dependency theory can be considered scholarship that takes the polarizing tendencies of capitalism as a starting point. So this goes against kind of this idea that capitalism evolves in an even manner and in the same way everywhere in the world. Theorization from the South, including taking the particularities of the South seriously, recognizing the specific constraints economies in the South face, a focus on social relations of production in a global way, and also taking this historical approach to understanding how capitalism evolved in a way that actually impacted different economies differently with very particular consequences for the global South. So this stands in contrast to what Samer Amin, the Egyptian-French Marxist, referred to as Eurocentrism in the social sciences in his book from 1988. So very briefly what Eurocentrism is, just because I'm going to refer to it a little bit as I go on. So Eurocentrism is this view of capitalism as something that is like a rational, progressive, peaceful force that capitalism developed endogenously in Europe through increased market interactions, hard work, technological improvements. These were like internal things that led England to develop. And these internal dynamics can be reproduced everywhere in the world. So it's like universalizes a partial understanding of capitalism. Why is it partial? Well, because this view leaves out the violent nature of the development of capitalism that led to a change in social relations, or that came from a change in social relations. And also the ways in which capitalism was shaped by unequal power dynamics globally, right? It leaves out colonialism, it leaves out the transatlantic slave trade, it leaves out racialization. It leaves out imperialism, it leaves out our understanding of capitalism as a global system. So I've written a book on this with 3 co-authors, Devika Dutt, Caroline Alves again, and Serbi Kezar, called Decolonizing Economics. And it's coming out in May, so for those of you who are interested, you can look out for it. And we talk mostly about the economics discipline as the mainstream of the discipline, but we also have a chapter on heterodox economics. And we argue, that heterodox economics can be a way to challenge Eurocentrism. It can be a way to think differently and from the South. But there are also aspects of heterodoxy that do reproduce this Eurocentric, isolated, kind of nation-focused view of economics. So that's something I think we need to grapple with as well as heterodox economists. So that leads me to what I think heterodox economics should be and what I'd like it to be. So I have 6 points on this, but I won't go too much into all of them. But the first one is anti-disciplinarity, because I think the split into disciplines in late 1800s, early 1900s was devastating for political economy. It split the politics from the economics, and we see that in the mainstream economics very clearly. And this is something that is crucial for heterodox economics to resist. Of course, we do study things related to the economy, but we shouldn't reduce our analysis to kind of only thinking in an economistic way. And I think the strength of heterodox approaches tends to be that we understand that theorization itself is political and that the political and the economic can't be separated. Second is focus on global social relations. When we look at labor exploitation, take it as our starting point, we need to also situate it within a global understanding of capitalism. This means understanding it in relation to patriarchy, imperialism, colonialism, white supremacy, even when we're talking about things going on in the US. So I'm not talking here about just ways to understand the global south better. It's also about trying to understand the global north better. For example, so I'm from Norway, which is why I have this very complicated last name. Sorry about that. And I hear very often Norwegians love to say that capitalism works really well in Norway. We have found a way to make capitalism fair and good and rational because unions are strong and we have a very, very generous welfare state. So they reach this conclusion because they don't see that the form that capitalism takes in Norway it fundamentally depends on exploitation elsewhere. Labor exploitation for cheap goods, keeping the inflation rate low. Prabhat Patnaik has made this point many times. Export of oil to the rest of the world is also a part of the Norwegian model. We need mineral extraction, labor exploitation to create the Teslas, the Nissan Leafs that are all around Norway. Norway is has the highest EV use per capita, and Norwegians consider themselves to be the greenest in the world. So thinking that this is a solely Norwegian form of capitalism that doesn't rely on violence, exploitation, and extraction globally leads Norwegians to believe that any country in the world can become like Norway, right? If they pursue the same kind of rational policies, support welfare state, strengthen unions. And you hear Norwegians say this a lot, and actually it's not just Norwegians, it's people, as a Norwegian, I meet a lot of people across the world that talk about how, other countries need to become more like Scandinavia, and like what policies can, countries implement to become more like Scandinavia. So I think this is hugely delusional, and I think it's Eurocentric. And the key point here is to understand that any economic process in the global north or the global south needs to move away from methodological nationalism. So methodological nationalism is when you kind of consider one country as the most relevant unit of analysis, and when you consider them as separate. So you think, oh, this country did this, it developed like that, and you ignore all the other things that actually supported the development of that country. You still think that those policies can be implemented elsewhere, but you don't take into consideration the actual global dynamics that make that impossible for all countries to be Norway, right? So these are global problems that we see in the global north as well as the global south, so solutions also need to be global. That was my second point. So my third point, focus on power relations. I already talked about that. Theorizing in a non-Eurocentric way. I already talked about that as well. So the fifth and second to last point is, beyond these kind of blocks that have to do with theory and policy, as a community, we also shouldn't marginalize scholarship and scholars from the South, or scholars with identities that you might not see as much in economics, in our research, our teaching, and our academic and political activities. I think there are a huge amount of kind of structural forms of discrimination in heterodoxy as well as in the mainstream. So that's also something that we need to grapple with. I think things have gotten better since I was a PhD student, but there's a lot more work to do. And this is not just a question of justice. I mean, it is a question of justice, but it's also this exclusion of certain kinds of scholars and scholarship from certain places also makes us poorer as a community. Like opening up and being more inclusive also makes us richer, better, less navel-gazing. So that's another important point. Finally, so as heterodox economists, and this speaks to what Clara and others were saying earlier as well, we should embody heterodoxy not just in our scholarship, but also in our praxis. And there has been a separation of academics from political action, political activity, and this is a part of the neoliberalization of the university. So building something heterodox also needs to try to break that down. And that's not something one individual academic can do on their own. That's something that we need institutional organizing to actually be able to achieve. So this is something that, I think the center can contribute to. Thank you.
So terribly, I forgot to mention the last book of James Galbraith. He has many. It just came out, Entropy Economics, The Living Basis of Value in Production, with the University of Chicago Press. And so check it out.
Thanks very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here, I must say, particularly since I arrived about 2 minutes before the start of the program. I do understand the advantages of the term heterodoxy insofar as it permits all of us to gather under a common banner of intellectual independence and respect for a diversity of perspectives and differences even over politics and policy. By definition, one cannot be heterodox and at the same time doctrinaire or dogmatic. And yet, the term has the drawback of defining us not by what we think, but by what we oppose. I once asked a colleague why we concede this upright and right-seeming prefix ortho to the orthodox, and why we didn't instead deploy the more accurate unidox, or I suggested maybe homodox, and he replied, you know damn well why we don't. Still, let me suggest that a superficially scattered oppositionism is not entirely sufficient to our purposes. And one of the reasons we're here, and I want to just salute Clara and her colleagues for this magnificent work in bringing us here, surely is to work towards some form of common ground and common understandings. That is the immodest purpose of this book, this effort co-authored with my friend Jing Chen, a mathematician. And again, congratulate Clara on the timing of this conference, but it was only published a couple of weeks ago, and it is only now just rolling off the mighty presses of the University of Chicago, which a great institution, and Clara and I and some others have been in the process of broadening out its reach and deepening its influence with a terrific appreciation for the support we've gotten there. But the purpose of the book is to, and I should say that unlike Anwar's book, which is a truly great work, this one is small and light enough that I could actually carry it on the airplane. A purpose is to specify an underpinning for basic economic theory that is so broad and sufficiently fundamental that it could support, we think, nearly the whole heterodox project, while isolating the mainstream and exposing the pre-scientific reality behind the scientific pretensions of that perspective. Pretensions that serve as a defensive wall around orthodoxy, while cutting it off, not only from us, from the heterodox in economics, but also from every modern scientific and social scientific discipline with which economic heterodoxy is naturally allied. And by modern, I mean everything since the middle of the 19th century, at least, if not even before that. So let me just set out in just a few minutes some of the basic ideas. We call them biophysical because they align thinking about economic questions with the core of modern biology and physics. And we call our book Entropy Economics, the living basis of value and production, to underscore the compatibility of this core with the second law of thermodynamics, the essential principle behind any living mechanical or social system, well, for that matter, any basic physics. First, all processes tap into low entropy resources and must do so with a usable margin or a surplus. The theory of surplus value, Marx's theory, applies this principle to labor, but it's broader than labor, fitting energy and ecological economics equally well. And this is a part of the country, I may say, where I suspect that point is extremely well appreciated. This is a region which has been one of the foundations of the energy economy of the United States. Second, to extract low entropy resources and use them requires fixed investment. Whether you're talking about something as simple as, seemingly simple as photosynthesis or any utilization by any living being of the resources in its environment, economic production, or social organization. To achieve anything along these lines requires differentials. That is to say, requires inequalities. Can't escape that. Temperature, pressure, income. This is Carnot's principle, so it's entirely in line with the basics of thermodynamics. But, and this is essential, those inequalities must be regulated or controlled to keep them within the limits of the capacity of the fixed investment of the system is being created. And that is as equally true for social and economic inequalities as it is for the temperature in a reactor or the pressure in your automobile engine or the blood pressure that many of us have to regulate pharmaceutically once we reach a certain age. Third, all fixed investments occur according to plans. There's no escaping from planning. Planning occurs at the level of the gene, of the blueprint, of the architectural drawing, of the technology, and in society of the habits, regulations, laws, and constitutions which govern our actions. Thus, all markets are constructed and regulated by governments. There is no such thing as a free market. This is a myth created precisely to deny one of the most basic realities of the physical and biological world. There is no opposition between state and market. Nothing would happen if it were not regulated to the satisfaction. You wouldn't buy lettuce, you wouldn't get in airplanes, you wouldn't be here, you wouldn't deal with the bank, you wouldn't do anything. You wouldn't cross the street if you didn't think something was keeping the traffic from running you down. Okay? Everything requires regulation, and so the issue is not whether to have it or not have it, it's whether it's good regulation or bad regulation, effective regulation or defective regulation, or adequate regulation, inadequate regulation. And of course, without regulation, we already have metaphors. Things explode, they melt down. We have crashes and crises. That's what happens to banks and has happened. Fourth, plans evolve. They will stay the same, which is why living entities, technologies, and societies diverge over time. And that is why there are no universal formulas for economic policy, and why it is not a good idea for economists to go around the world, as the World Bank and the IMF have made a practice of doing, telling you exactly what you need to do in the lines of the Washington Consensus. Universal formulas do not work in different situations. Fifth, production, which is the domain of organizations and of power relations, is prior to exchange. If you haven't produced anything, you haven't got anything to exchange. And all production occurs in the hope of profit, subject to uncertainty, of a limited duration. The organizations that govern production have boundaries. There are no universal jurisdictions, which is why the project of universal globalization was doomed to come to grief eventually. And the boundaries are higher as the demands on the organization become more complex. Boundaries are not impermeable, and they shouldn't be impermeable, but they distinguish the inside from the outside, and so the sphere or jurisdiction of regulatory control. Sixth, and I'll make this my last one, there could be a few more, but this I think will cover the territory reasonably well. Nothing is eternal. There is no equilibrium, there is no final state, no natural tendency of the system. You don't know the distant future better than you know the present or the short-term future. This is entirely in line with Keynes's basic view of the world, and I think brings different major tendencies of heterodox economics into communication with each other. There is neither a micro nor such macro constructs as the growth rate, the employment rate, or the rate of interest. These notions of naturalness were designed in order to make it, to relieve responsibility and accountability, the policymakers who actually make the decisions that affecting such things. We are all mortal, and the task of the economist is to do the best one can for as long as possible, but also recognizing when reform is no longer possible and more drastic steps are required, and that is yet another task that the heterodox community should be discussing amongst themselves as we proceed. In any event, that gives you a flavor. There's a little bit of mathematics in this book, but it's much, much less than in Anwar. So I have to say, only two equations really, which reflects the extreme modesty of my mathematician co-author, but also the sharpness of his insights. And so I just hope that it provides at least some food for thought and perhaps some useful source of conversation as we move forward. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, so the idea here is to do a brief, short second round of just some thoughts. And I think one point of reflection that is crucial is indeed, again, taking seriously Brad's words, is how do we make ourselves more relevant? And I think this is actually a really important point. How do we make it so that the Center for Heterodox Economics isn't just, you know, a privilege of few that get to think in sophisticated ways, and that's it. And I think this is important because, of course, there's challenges that we will face. And so the question is here, how much, you know, of course, can the way we approach the discipline help be stronger in confronting these challenges? A challenge just came up like in a couple days ago, right? The panel that I care most of in this conference, the political economy of occupied Palestine, came under extreme attack. As we also heard, there is a lot of pressure in this town, like everywhere in academia today, to censor certain conversations that, guess what, are the most urgent that need to be actually dealt with, right? And so I think here there is a really, already I think in the day-to-day, especially in this historical moment in which indeed the violence of capitalism is emerging in its bare face, embodied by the policies of Donald Trump. Both domestically, the harsh austerity agenda that is brutal and very obvious, but also what is happening in Palestine, we know very well. And so it's very interesting that what before was done more subtly now is exposed so obviously. And I think we need to have the courage here to avoid thinking in exceptionalistic terms, right? The methodological individualism, that is something that I think all the heterodox traditions oppose, tend to understand what is happening in Palestine as separate from the dynamics of capitalism at large, of global capitalism at large, and the violent political organization of our socioeconomic system. And this is profoundly wrong. So I just want to state how important it is that among our session, we have a session that puts us, gives us the duty of confronting the most urgent dynamics in a way that is profound, rigorous, and also different, right? Because the economic dimension of the oppression is rarely discussed, of course, because it reveals what is really at stake, the subordination that is really at stake, that otherwise the mainstream just is capable of denying to the point of course, calling biased anything that is critical, right? So I think this, for me, has been a lesson even in organizing this conference, has been, well, I think this center can only survive and do something if we have the courage to stand up for what we believe is actually knowledge that can help empower people to think in a way that is truly emancipatory. And of course, knowledge is power, and that's why knowledge is the first dimension that is attacked by our governments and our system at large. So I think maybe, I don't know, then I don't want to hijack the conversation, but you of course can make all the comments you would like. But I think reasoning on how is it that we can propose a center and a way of understanding us as scholars that makes us more relevant for this world, that actually, of course, we face, you know, opposition, but we need to be prepared. So how best can we be prepared, and what can we do as scholars in this world to act in a way that is honest and heterodox? Anwar, do you want to, or should we go around the same round? Whatever you prefer.
Okay. I found myself part of the same collective. There were a lot of people in 1968. We kept it going. But I found myself unhappy with the split between the desire to change the world and the understanding of how it operates. People had local understandings, but orthodoxy is also give you a general understanding. And I come from an early training as an aeronautical engineer, and the one thing I know is you don't walk into the cockpit and start pressing buttons to see what happens, right? That's not a good idea. You really should know the principles, and you should know the need of the specific things if you're going to intervene. So I've always had a pretty conservative view from that point of view. We can't make things happen if we don't understand how they have happened. And to me, that became my task, as I said, 20 years, but 50% of my book is empirical, because I had to study what was there, and sometimes it goes back, you know, to 1870s. I had to study what other people said about it. I had to study what data they brought out. I sometimes had to study how the data was constructed. I don't mind that, I like that, but that's a kind of construction and deconstruction that you have to do if you're going to explain something. You can't just say, I don't like it. Well, that's fine, but you press a button, something's going to happen, and you need to know how that's going to happen. In every chapter of my book, I take the phenomena first. That's what we have to explain. I then go to the various explanations, including those of heterodox economists, and then I try to present an alternate set of explanations, but each chapter, the explanations have to be connected. They have to be consistent, because otherwise you're just creating a series of alternatives, and I don't think you can do that. I don't think you should do that, but anyway, I don't think I should do that. I wanted a structure that would hold up to the empirical evidence, hold up to alternate theories, and hold up to criticism. Whether I was successful or not, I don't know, but I can tell you that I once told some students that when I solved a particular different problem, I was high for 2 months, and they were really impressed because they had never seen anybody who was high for 2 months.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. And so how do we make ourselves more relevant, or how can this center become more relevant? I think one thing that we maybe do as heterodox scholars, sometimes maybe a bit too much, and you know, I've also maybe gone into that trap, but it's the engagement with the mainstream. Like the actual engagement, like trying to convince and like going into arguments with the mainstream economist. And I think that engaging with mainstream economics for ourselves to clarify our own understanding is important and to communicate that understanding, but we are never going to be able to convince we're never going to be able to change the mainstream of the economics discipline through our arguments, right? Through rational through convincing them with their ideas, because they are not there because they've won some kind of battle of ideas. They're there because they reflect a power relation in society, right? They serve a particular purpose. They are there because of capitalism, basically. So I think that's kind of a impossible task to me. But I think it is important to critique them in order to, raise awareness among our students, among activists, among policymakers about how what they're saying is wrong. So I think that's, a really, really important part. And then to also obviously communicate also what the better way of understanding economics would be, because there's so many things that come from mainstream economics that now are just taken as common sense. And people don't question it because, or that maybe they think that maybe it doesn't sound right, but they haven't heard this kind of systematic takedown of it that people on this panel have provided, and others obviously in this room as well. So I think that's maybe one thing that's quite important in terms of where to direct our energy. The other thing is, given how difficult these mainstream economics departments are, I think there is a lot of potential to organize ourselves outside of them. And there does seem to be a lot of thirst for alternatives in other spaces, like centers popping up around the world, and also in like policy think tanks, things like that, the media, where we can take up space and contribute to organizing and raise awareness about heterodox economics that doesn't limit us to just this kind of academic exchange and fight with the mainstream. There is a division of labor to some extent. I don't think that like we all academics should also be activists. So that's not kind of the point of kind of linking to praxis. I do think it's really, really important to do the sort of hard academic work, publish in journals and engage in these like kind of rigorous debates, but also show how it's relevant. When there is a big issue that comes up, like Palestine, for example, or Trump, political economy of Trump. Of course, when those big things come up, I think that's the moment to kind of draw on the heterodox scholars that are working on those issues to kind of show how something that a lot of people care about who maybe don't care about heterodox economics or haven't heard about heterodox economics can then understand why like this explanation is more compelling. And that could also be a way of kind of linking to organizing. That's, my thoughts.
I'll give a somewhat different sort of answer, though I've come rather late in my career to write about very general matters of theory. That's not what I've done for most of my career, and it wasn't the way I was raised. I was raised, of course, in an academic household, but the person who framed that household was not raised as an academic. He grew up on a farm. And if you look at his early work, it's on such matters as the marketing of honey in California and the things of this nature. And I asked him once, he got into policy at a very early age, and in his early 30s he was charged with controlling every price in the United States for the purpose of combating inflation in World War II. He became the director for prices of the Office of Price Administration. And I asked him once, how did he find 17,000 people in the United States to control prices within a matter of months? And he said, land-grant colleges, I hired all the economists. And in those days, the economists knew something about how to do that sort of thing. They were experts in transportation, in energy, in labor, in agriculture, in industry. That was what they did, and they had that sense of their surroundings to be able to apply to policy issues. And this is what I've also attempted to do. As soon as I got to graduate school, I got out as quickly as possible and went to work on Capitol Hill. I found myself involved in two sets of issues that turned out to have some significance for the future of fate of capitalism. One of them was the goals of monetary policy. And I found myself on the team that drafted the so-called dual mandate, including full employment in the statutory mandate of the Federal Reserve, against all of the orthodoxies of the monetarism of that moment. Yet we managed to get it in after 30 or 40 years, it's become rather well accepted, actually, compared to really the catastrophic misdrafting of the charter of the European Central Bank, just for example. And the other one was debt crises. And I've been an ambulance chaser of debt crises from New York City to Mexico to Brazil, on to Greece, with exceedingly limited success, but every single one of them gives you a deeper understanding of just how fundamental it is to get control of the financial system and to direct it to public purpose and to keep it under decent regulation, and the damage that will happen if that doesn't happen. So it's this kind of thing that seems to me that that it can help define a heterodox perspective and give you a good sense that the people who are coming up through what are really very hermetically sealed academic channels, in which they really lost the connection to the real world that my father's generation of economists had. And it's not surprising that when they prescribe policy from textbook formulas, they get everything wrong. And either they're working in bad faith, or they truly don't understand anything about how, to use the word real, how the real world works. And I'm not close enough to them, and I'm not a psychologist, so I can't really tell you which of those two is true. But I'm not sure which verdict would actually be harsher. So I'll just leave it as an unresolved matter. Scotch verdict. Are they clueless, or are they doing this intentionally? You can work that out as best you can.
Thank you, Jamie. This is great. Wonderful. So I would say we have 10 to 15 minutes for a conversation that is larger. So I think Scott, yes, take the mic, please. Here.
Another session we have here that hasn't been spoken to is the community organizing and class consciousness session, which we think is also a very important pillar of what we're doing here. So to address what Ingrid was saying with respect to the division of labor, what we have here, we've brought organizers who have been successful in their own community organizing, but still find that they're losing. What we have here are these community organizers who have seen things that they need to be studied. So for us to engage these community organizers who are identifying the problems that they themselves are seeing that are unable to be addressed by mainstream economics. So that's what we're bringing here, and that's an important part of our community organizing session. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Scott. That's really important. Okay, so the floor is open to comments, questions. Yes, maybe you can present yourself when you speak. Here we are.
Thanks. I'm Steve Marr. I'm from SUNY Cortland. Thanks for all the presentations. This was really great to be here so far. Just off to a great start. I just want to throw out another perspective maybe and see what the reaction of everybody here and the panelists might be. What attracts me to heterodoxy is this conviction that, Clara said earlier, knowledge is power, but knowledge is also a weapon. And what that means is that if you start from the conviction or the understanding that the world is not fair, then you can use that weapon, that knowledge, to combat that unfairness and to arm the people, the groups that are being exploited, oppressed, treated unfairly. And so for me, what was so great about Clara's book, and I make all my undergraduates read it actually, is that it showed that austerity economics was not just economic science. It was a brutal weapon in the hands of the ruling class. It's not just objective science, it is a brutal weapon used to oppress and exploit and harm people. And so, that doesn't mean saying false things. It doesn't mean using a weapon in a facile way where you're kind of making up stories in order to pragmatically reach the predetermined end that you want to reach and to help people that you think you want to help. It means starting from the conviction that reason is on the side of the oppressed. Reason is on the side of the working class. Reason is on the side of the exploited. And so when we take knowledge out of the hands of the elite and we develop a knowledge that can enhance the understanding of the world around us in a way that can also be used by the people who are victims in the current world, we can then start to change the world. So there's no difference between a commitment to reason a commitment to heterodoxy, and a commitment to ending injustice and exploitation and oppression in all of its forms.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much. Yes. And it's also the idea of not compartmentalizing, right? Reason and justice are not separate issues, and so that's really, really important. Thoughts, comments, questions? Yes, over there, and then present yourself before you
Hi, excuse me. My name's Kyle Hayes. I'm an English faculty at TCC, so I'm the dumbest economist in this room. I actually have a question because what Clara said about facing the brutality of, or our students facing the brutality of the current political and economic situation. I'm kind of on the front lines. I've seen my students come in. They're constantly, they're asking me about ICE, about what's going on, with their income. Their funding's getting frozen. But what I've noticed over the past 5 years or so, maybe with the first Trump administration, was their vernacular change. Like, they have the language of anti-capitalism. They can kind of recognize what is being in front of them, but they seem so incoherent in actually being able to, put it into action. And they don't know where to really go with that. And so I was really interested in, like, where do you see this going? How do you see this going into, like, the humanities, the arts, or even into this community that is, Tulsa might be a little blue, but around it is deep, deep red. So how do you see this center moving forward to speak to those people who need it as much as, the academics and everything else? Thank you.
That's exactly the challenge that I think will make us not irrelevant, but fundamental for the construction of hopefully a more humane society, both locally and globally. And one thing that I can say, and then I pass it on, is that I think right now we are in the right moment to embark in this journey, because people feel the oppression of capitalism on their skin, as you pointed out, like very clearly. Trump being elected is a very sick symptom of that. And this is why we, I think, have more than ever the responsibility. Now, how do we communicate? That is the big question. How do we, Scott likes to say, and we've had conversation about this a lot and disagreements, he says we can't dumb it down. It's true, we can't dumb it down. But at the same time, you need to find a way to actually include these people in the conversation, because as Scott points out, it's them that know what the problem are, like, right? We are, unfortunately, by our just being in academia, too privileged to really understand, deeply understand what is going on. And that's where it needs to be then a collective endeavor, because the problems come out of people that are actually on the ground organizing and feeling the struggle. And so how to communicate, I think this is where us as academics need to really think it through. And I hope, at least, again, this is all an experiment, right? We are starting an experiment. We don't know how it's gonna go, but what I can tell you is that what I think is important is if we just open spaces for conversation. Like already now, like the fact that we are dialoguing, this is already super important. If we can create a space in Tulsa where your students, people can come in, can discuss, can have an exposition to tools they're not usually exposed to because it's nowhere what we're doing here, then that's already something I think that can help all of us create a common language that can hopefully like move things forward.
I just want to say, with respect to what Clara mentioned, with respect to the organizers, we also have to, the organizers have to organize better too. Okay, we can't just, just like, oh, you're organizing, you're doing this. No, organizing itself is a science, if you will. We have to do that right. We have to get it all right. So we can't just like worship the activists or, oh, you're doing so good. That doesn't necessarily do that. We have to have it in a way that's going to be transformative and actually endeavor to create power, because we want a seat at the table whether they want us there or not. Sorry about that. Cheers.
Yeah. Other thoughts from the panel on this question?
Look, I need to inject a little caution into this. I myself worked in Harlem. I met Malcolm X. I met his successor, Louis Farrakhan. I met various factions in the black community, and I sympathized with the condition and the anger and the actions, but many of them also failed. And that wasn't just because of the outside, it's because the anticipation of the consequences was wrong. I remember hearing of two kids named Carl and Fred who started off that same way. Carl is a philosopher, Fred was a rich activist. And they spent a lot of time in politics. They got kicked out of the Communist Party because they were too interested in how to apply theory to understand capitalism. And they're not academics, they were involved in that because there was a hostility against, in that tradition, against the study of academic arguments and empirical arguments too. So don't get carried away thinking that in the struggle, you will somehow understand everybody else's struggle. It's not like that. They're involved, but you need to understand how the matrix in which you stand operates and how it connects and what happens if you push that damn button here or somewhere else. Now, I'm not saying everybody should do what I tried to do. I came to that after having done these things, and I decided this was a task that I wanted to take on and I was happy with. Other people like Mike Zweig, who was the opposite, was very good and very happy doing the other side. And we stayed in touch to try and learn from each other, but don't partition it so that everybody has to do the same thing. That's why Carl and Fred left the Revolutionary Communist Party. They got kicked out, actually, but that's why.
You can go.
You know, I think that if you're asking what is the task that faces us, the first thing is to recognize that we are in a moment really full of vast days, when things are changing before our eyes, when there's an unprecedented assault on established institutions, including many that we would like to defend, and others that we may not feel should be defended. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that so? What's driving this? And I would suggest that part of the analysis is that as a society, and I'm talking here about the United States, we have built up vast social overheads, fixed costs, which we cannot sustain. Well, part of that's the financial sector. And we discovered already 15 years ago that vastly too much of our national resources were controlled and used and absorbed by an essentially unregulated financial sector, which had a very predatory attitude toward the rest of the population. I would suggest that our military posture in the world has very much the same character, the character of a vast past investment, which is now technologically obsolete, but still an enormous drain on resources. We got to think about how one moves back to deploy the resources we have in a way that is, let's say, socially efficient. And that's if that doesn't happen, all other kinds of institutions that we do that we should preserve. I'm thinking about social insurance programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, low-income assistance, you name it, are going to take the blow instead. So I mean, just thinking about this in a coherent way, I think is one contribution that heterodox economists can make, and that mainstream economists simply have no tools to think about how to think about this in a coherent way. They just have essentially ideological hostility to anything that was created and represented social progress and really effective class compromise to a very great extent in the 20th century. And they would like to go back to the 19th. I have to say, since you mentioned Carl and Fred, that one of the great advantages of teaching in, broadly speaking, this part of the world is the kind of people you encounter. And there was a day I was teaching a small class of undergraduates and reading them a letter drafted by Marx to Abraham Lincoln on the occasion of his inauguration in 1865. And he said that the working men of Europe felt instinctively the Star-Spangled Banner carried the destiny of their class. A wonderful phrase. And at the end of the class, one of my students, who was an young lady from the suburbs of Fort Worth came up to me and said, "You know, Professor, I think you might be interested to know that my great-great-great-great-grandfather was Frederick Engels."
I'll just add something very brief. I agree with what Anwar was saying as well. So in terms of, I mean, of course, and as I said earlier, we have become, like, through the neoliberalization of the university, we've become separated from the social fabric. So in a way, you know, we've become separate from political action. But at the same time, it's not like, you know, the social fabric is the same as before the neoliberalization of academia. There's also been like a super squeeze of the left, marginalization of the left. Social movements, you know, now are not what they were in the 60s. So that also, you know, it's not like just engaging with social movements and people on the ground will, you know, lead to the change that we, you know, hope to see. But that's not to say that we shouldn't, you know, raise consciousness, build coalitions. Think about, I mean, I like what the center is doing and thinking about like problems coming from the ground, but I think it's also worth thinking about which ground, right? And, you know, which coalitions, and thinking of, you know, connecting the dots maybe and thinking about broader grounds as well, maybe in an internationalist way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another couple questions before we come to a close. There's a hand here. Perfect. And don't forget to say your name and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Xavier Doolittle. I'm not an academic, actually don't even have a college degree, but I knew Scott and I was really excited about this whole thing. And my question was actually pretty similar to the last one at first, so maybe this is a bit more thoughts, but maybe try to take it from a different angle, because growing up, because I grew up around here, rural Oklahoma especially and stuff, I didn't have a lot of exposure to ideas like this. And I was a pretty intellectually curious person, you know, read a lot, did eventually come to these ideas, you know, because the internet existed. I could go to Marxist.org and, you know, find what, you know, I needed to do and read all the old texts from people from the 19th, 18th century, etc. But when I started becoming an adult and actually talking to people who had academic backgrounds, it became very clear that what I had access to and what I had learned was just not sufficient, and was also pretty much detached from lived reality and experience. And I began to read and I began to think, but like, the barriers to access for that are so great, and like the context to be able to even talk about these ideas, like so many people I know, they have no concept of even what the labor theory of value is, like, or even like what that means. And like there's no language in it in just like that mainstream. When we were talking about engaging with the mainstream and like thinking about this center and what it can do, kind of like going back, is like I think a lot about like a lot of these political and economic ideas as they translated in a more, let's say, non-academic way were through social groups. You know, like it's like I mean, talk about like the development of the International Workmen's Association happened in like beer gardens. It happened in like places where people like went and like hung out and they talked about ideas and they talked about high ideas, and that still happens. But now it's become like on Discords and Facebook groups and stuff, and we become detached from place. And so I guess maybe to put an idea is like if we think of the center as a place and like how we can incorporate that, do any of you have any ideas or responses of like how we can integrate the social dimension as well as the academic one and expanding these ideas to make them something that people can be more accessible to? Thank you.
Not easy to answer. Any thoughts from the...
Sorry. Very good point made here is, can you create a place where these different people having experience, but also talking about how they understand the world, get together? Because I've seen in many different places, invite them here. And we come from that discussion, we get some sense of what they want and what they like, and we get a sense of what they don't like from us.
Yeah, that is a little bit, I mean, again, this is all an experiment, but the idea of having these monthly events as, again, one of the things the center will do, but in a way that has both scholars and economists, academics, with organizers, with different people, maybe even in the policy-making sector. So even to involve those who at the local level and not so local are actually doing the policy-making, right? Because I think a point that Jamie was pointing out is that also, you know, there's the bottom-up, but there's also the top-down, and also engaging in like pushing the discourse at the level of policy-making is definitely another important level at which we can make ourselves relevant and crucial, right? So yeah, so the idea, I think, of bringing different perspectives, and then there's different channels in which this type of empowering knowledge can get dispersed. And of course, like the community college, we went and flyered at the community college, and that's probably why you know that this is even happening. We brought and there's 4 branches of the community college here in Tulsa. So I had a cool past weeks learning about Tulsa just by trying to bring the message that we were having the inauguration. And you know, already the community college is a great place, and maybe we can have some events there, like bring also these different universities, places where knowledge is already created, but unite them somehow. It's so important. And the young generation is really what we are hoping for to save all of us in a way, right? David here.
Thank you, and thank you to all the speakers, David McNally from University of Houston. And I just wanted to make one comment about how serious activists and organizers out there don't think they have all the answers. They know they need critical perspectives. They know they need theory, and they know they need historical analysis. And I've been really privileged to direct something in Houston called the Project on Race and Capitalism. And one of the things that has been an incredible honor to do has been to work with George Floyd's family in organizing events regularly around race and capitalism. And George Floyd's brother was a truck driver. Philonise Floyd is his name, when George was killed. And since then, he has spent his whole time speaking at the United Nations. Everywhere Black people are shot in the United States where the Floyd family gets invited, he goes and he speaks. He's met with dignitaries, mayors, Congress people, senators, and so on. And yet, what he says to me is that when he comes to the events that the Project on Race and Capitalism does at the University of Houston with people like Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Robin D.G. Kelly and so on, his statement to me a year ago was, I learn more here in one day than I do in weeks of all those other meetings. So you've got an enormous opportunity here with the Center for Heterodox Economics to both be a site of critical knowledge production, but also bring in the community activists and organizers who know they don't have all the answers, but they want these spaces. And so do everything that you can to let them know this space is also for them, because it's not an automatic assumption that activists and organizers in the communities, in unions, in anti-racist and anti-poverty groups take for granted. There's a lot of outreach that needs to be done, and I really commend the fact that this is part of your vision, because there's an audience out there for that.
Thank you. Wonderful. One last thought or question? Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Brian Turner, and I'm working with a group of people here in Tulsa to eradicate poverty by initiating and supporting conversations that result in effective action at the local and state level to institute universal basic income. And we're playing for keeps. But this is a level of organizing that's right at where the rubber meets the road, and I'll mix my metaphors here. We have to be able to stick our knuckles in it to get down and talk about the political emphases, the scientific emphases, because the fear of mine is I'm going to be making a presentation somewhere, and some sharp orthodox economist is going to carve me a new one, right? Because I'm not an economist, I'm a social worker. And if we in this room want to get down to the conversation about how we make things happen, we have to stick our knuckles in it up to about our elbows. And that's what I would challenge this group to do, is to get down where I am and stick your knuckles in it. Thank you. It is eradicating poverty, is what we're called. I've got business cards. If you want them, I'll be happy to pass them out. Thank you. I am here recruiting, by the way, in case you guessed.
Wonderful, it's wonderful. I saw Costas wanted to make one last remark. Carolina, did you want to make one last remark? Someone in the back there had their hands up. Exception, okay, you don't have to worry. We're done in 2 minutes, and then there's a great reception and then you get a ticket for a drink as well. So 2 minutes, and then we are good. So who is in the back there? Already, Drew. Okay, let me do Costas and then Drew. Do you want to come up, Drew, so people see you? You want to come here? Okay, Costas, present yourself. Sorry, I just said your first name.
My name is Kostas Lapavitsas. I want to say something about this business of accessing people, and I want to give you some experience from Britain at the moment, which is in dire trouble. And the only social forces that have got some promise are trade unions. Now, British trade unionists are very good with forensic knowledge of particular industries and sectors. They don't need me or anybody from the unions, from the universities, to tell them how Microsoft works or how Amazon works. They know very well. What they don't have is pretty much the knowledge that the last person who spoke, Brian spoke, which is, how does the macroeconomy work? How does the financial system work? How does the whatever it is works? And they don't have that because they used to, but they don't anymore, because the knowledge of political economy among trade unionists has collapsed the last 40 years because of the evolution of the trade union movement. So what they need from us is precisely this. And what we've started, with some funding, is something that's called the Knowledge Transfer Program, financed by the British government, as it happens. And that basically aims at providing macro knowledge, macroeconomic knowledge, and political economy knowledge to trade unions across the country. How we're going to do it, we're not entirely certain. It began 3 weeks ago. It's got 2 years to run. Now, what I would suggest, I mean, the United States is different from the United Kingdom, obviously. You'll have to sort your own problems out here. But what I would suggest for this center, which is very promising here, is that you don't wait for people to come to you only. You go to them, which is what we're going to do with the Knowledge Transfer Program. You organize some way of reaching out, because workers and ordinary people will not come to university. They don't do that. You have to find ways of going to them, going to the communities, going to wherever it is. You judge how you're going to do that, and you pass that knowledge over. You convey that knowledge. You simplify it, you popularize it, and you pass it over. And they will thank you for it. So long as it's knowledge of this type. Don't tell them how their immediate world works. They know it. Tell them how the broader thing works. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Costas. That's so important. Thank you. And Costas will be on the panel on inflation and austerity tomorrow. So looking forward to his thoughts. Drew had the last comment. You can present yourself.
Thank you, Andrew Wood, History Department. To you, first, shout out to Scott and Clara for Palestinian support and solidarity. We have to speak and break the silence. And also, I loved what was said about breaking down the national frameworks and looking more internationally at how economics works. Finally, a plug, I guess, for household economics. And when I think about economics in my own household, there are many wonderful things to think of course, but seriously and in a kind of scary way, there is debt and there are taxes. And I'll comment just briefly on the latter. My wife and I sit, and as we watch our podcasts and eat our, quesadillas and whatnot, we're like, we're going to pay another X $1,000s to the federal government so that they can turn and go and kill people with our money. And I am sure all of us recognize this terrible tragedy, but what do we do? Last year we got online sort of last minute. How do we become tax resistors? Where are the resources for that? And it just, I felt very alone and weak, and finally just felt, you know, fuck it. We can't escape from the octopus, the tax collectors, you know, the tax man, like the old Beatles song. So maybe we can talk about taxes at some point. Maybe we can talk about debt and household debt. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we have here with us Bob Lord, who's a tax expert, and he'll be actually giving a very, very concrete example of how regressive our taxation system is tomorrow at the inflation and austerity panel. So thank you so much. I want to say there's over 40 incredible scholars and organizers who are taking part of these 3 days. It's an honor. People have flown from really far, from Palestine to Brazil to Europe. We are here together to build something. I'm so grateful that you could come, that you could participate. I hope you can come also in the next sessions. We'll always have really good food to keep you motivated. And starting from now, thank you so much. And Jizu has the tickets for the drinks, and so does Linda. Thank you so much.
Well, something's like the summertime, they can walk about, strolling through the meadow green, it's pleasant, there's no doubt.